Alright, so returning to this great book by Jacques Ellul, Propaganda, The Formation of Men's Attitudes, from the author of the famous book, The Technological Society. Jacques Ellul is a philosopher, a historian, and a psychologist who studies propaganda. So first chapter was the characteristics of propaganda. We learned about the true nature of propaganda and how pervasive it is and how pernicious it is. But now we learn about the conditions for the existence of propaganda. When is there propaganda, rather? This is the first page I'm going to read. And then this is the second page. And you can follow along on a different screen and pause the pictures while I read the Bezo. Why and how does propaganda exist? So one thing I learned from Jan Arvin, who was a friend of Mark Passio, was that when you ask questions, you first start with who, what, where, when. That describes the details of the physical condition. Then you ask why, because that tells you the intentions behind it. That's the spiritual reason. And then the how, that makes you an expert on the topic. Because when you understand the mechanics, then you can tweak the mechanics and explain it to others. We have already noted that propaganda was not the same in the past as it is today, that its nature has changed. We have also said that one cannot simply make any propaganda just anywhere, at any time, or in any fashion. Without a certain milieu, propaganda cannot exist. Only under certain conditions can the phenomena of propaganda appear and grow. The most obvious of these are accidental or purely historical conditions. So accidentally or historically, in certain conditions, it can grow. But beyond that, it is clear, for example, that the emergence of propaganda is connected with a number of scientific discoveries. Next page. Modern propaganda could not exist without the mass media. The inventions that produce press, radio, television, and motion pictures, or those that produce the means of modern transportation, and which permit crowds of diverse individuals from all over to assemble easily and frequently. So here I think he's talking about the Metrolink, but he's also talking about self-driving cars. And there's a lot of propaganda in those areas. For example, in the airports, you can't keep your luggage outside the restroom and use the restroom because then people will think it's a bomb. That happened to me once. Present-day propaganda meetings no longer bear any relation to past assemblies, to the meetings of the Athenians in the Agora or the Romans in the Forum. Then there is the scientific research in all the other fields, sociology and psychology, for example. Without the discoveries made in the past half century, and this book was written in the 1960s, by scientists who never wanted this, there would be no propaganda. The findings of social psychology, depth psychology. So, just an example, you see how all these scientists we respect and make such great achievements, most of them are ashamed of their achievements because their results were co-opted by the dark side to serve the economy or the mind control of the population. So are they really that special if they cannot even feel proud of their achievements, right? So the findings of social psychology, depth psychology, behaviorism, group sociology, sociology of public opinion are the very foundations of the propagandist's work. In a different sense, political circumstances have also been effective and immediate causes of the development of massive propaganda. The First World War, the Russian Revolution of 1917, Hitler's Revolution of 1933, the Second World War, the further development of revolutionary wars since 1944 in China, Indochina, and Algeria, as well as the Cold War. Each was a step in the development of modern propaganda. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. These supposed different, opposite, contrasting sides and their wars, supposedly for global peace, was only to bring global peace through the top police of the propaganda and the propagandists. So with each of these events, propaganda developed further, increased in depth, discovered new methods. At the same time, it conquered new nations and new territories. To reach the enemy, one must use his weapons. This undeniable argument is the key to the systematic development of propaganda. To reach the enemy, one must use his weapons, such as his critical thinking facilities and brain and so on. And their children are turned against them by the state, when in the past they were the protectors of the parents. And in this way, propaganda has become a permanent feature in nations that actually despise it, such as the United States and France. Let us also note the influence of doctrines and men. It is clear that a particular doctrine can make propaganda the very center of political life, such as the Black Lives Matter Antifa types who just hate Trump and what America stood for. So a particular doctrine can make propaganda the very center of political life, the essence of political action, rather than merely an accessory or an incidental and rather suspect instrument. So what I'm doing is seen as an accessory or incidental and rather suspect. But Black Lives Matter, out there destroying businesses, wrecking the peace and order of civilization, that's a political and positive, you know? But anyway, Leninism as developed by Mao is really a doctrine of propaganda plus action. So that's what these Black Lives Matter are all about, Leninism and Maoism. It's an action-based propaganda, indissolubly linked to Marxism, of which it is an expression. As Leninism spreads, Lemmiwinks. As Leninism spreads, propaganda develops with it by necessity and not by choice. So propaganda is necessary because all their freaking philosophies are based on a manic emotionalism and stupidity and naivety. In addition, certain men have greatly helped the development of propaganda. Hitler and Goebbels, for example, had a genius for it. But the role of such men is never decisive. They do not invent propaganda. It does not exist just because they want it to. They are only the producers and directors, the catalysts, who profit from the confluence of favorable circumstances. All this is too well known and too obvious to dwell on. So that's what I say, the system is a fraud. It's the system, not just the spokespeople that we see up in the front. It's much deeper. And we're all complicit in it to varying degrees. But the sum of certain conditions is still not enough to explain the development of propaganda. The overall sociological conditions in a society must provide a favorable environment for propaganda to succeed. So it's all about the sociological condition of the society, which determines the success of propaganda. For example, today we have lived for 20 years in a very controlled and very steadily deteriorating society and civilization. So the people are in a very weak and poor state, and the children are even worse. So it's a favorable environment for propaganda to succeed, obviously. And Trump, he talks about some of these causes of propaganda, but since people are so brainwashed, they see Trump as the scapegoat to blame all their problems on, as they learned to do with their churches, in their churches, with Jesus Christ. And what the individual is about, really. So the same factors of influence will have different weights and effectiveness in different contexts. The media employed by the propagandists can work only in a particular sociological structure. This reciprocal influence of propaganda and social structure is precisely one of the problems that need to be studied. And when I started criticizing the social structure and the role of females and things like that in society, that's when the propagandists panicked and kicked me out of the club, you know? Because, like Octavio Paz says, to solve the insane problems of our current world, insane world, we're going to need to think something extreme, not the same old tried and repetitive strategies that have been people talking about for the forever, but nothing really changes. Ernst Chris and Nathan Leitz have properly noted that public responses to the impact of propaganda have changed considerably in the past few decades, and that this change is the result of trends in the psychosociological conditions of 20th century life. This reminds me of the bitch telling me that my ideas are outdated. And her friend telling me that oh no, her friend was all about Fight Club, yeah. And the psychosociological, I guess she understood the psychosociological conditions of our modern life. But I think her conclusions for solutions are disease and defective, just like her mind and her heart. So now we are at the page 90. Next section, the first section, the sociological conditions. I think I'll come back to it in the next video. It's already been 15 minutes.